How do you make tracks feel wide and three-dimensional in stereo and in headphones without losing all their power when played in a club or on a mono phone speaker? Well, through releasing tons of club records and making thousands of tutorials, I've learned exactly which stereo techniques work in both worlds. So today I'm going to show you 3 stereo width tricks that feel super wide and actually sound great in mono. Okay, let's get into technique number 1. Here's how to go beyond basic ambience and use reverb as a stealth stereo widener. So here I've got these synth chords. They're already a little bit stereo, but I'd like to widen them some more and change their character all in one move. And I'm going to do that with convolution reverb. Here's Shaperbox with Reverb Shaper loaded. I've got the Thin Room 2 impulse response selected, and the reverb is set to fully wet. Decay is down to 20% because I don't want a decaying tail. So even though I'm using reverb, I do not want the synth to sound reverby at all. This isn't about placing the sound in an audible space. Instead, the impulse response is acting as a short stereo widener. So my synth sounds very similar, but stereo, and it's also changing the timbre in a way I prefer too. And we can switch through impulse responses for different timbres. Now when I sum the master to mono, you can hear that these chords now sound too quiet in the mono mix. That's because as a sound gets wider in stereo, it will seem relatively quieter in mono, so we need to find a balance. I could do this by reducing the reverb's mix amount, but I like the transformative effect at full mix. So instead I've got Width Shaper next in the chain. This is reducing the width to 65%. And then I'm bringing the volume back up by around 6.5 dB to match levels. And with Shaperbox off then on, as I play the overall mix, hear how these stereoized chords now wrap around the mono bass synth. So using reverb as a tight widener, not an obvious reverb, is super versatile. And by the way, if you don't own Shaperbox already, you can try out all these tricks with the free demo, link below. Okay, technique number 2. This one's great for making synths, arps and rhythmic sounds jump out of the speakers while still sounding solid in the center. So I've got this arpeggio here, which is far too narrow as is. Regular static panning allows you to position sounds around the stereo field, which is useful, but a bit vanilla. Instead, we can use rhythmic panning driven by an LFO, otherwise known as auto panning. So here I'll load a stock auto pan device, and I'll make this ARP dance left and right across the speakers. The amount is basically a mix control. 50% is often a good starting point. Different LFO waveforms change the shape of the movement from side to side. Most auto panners have basic shapes to choose from. But what if you want a more custom shape? Well, let's fire up Shaperbox and open Pan Shaper, and I'm going to draw a panning rhythm to fit this ARP. You can get as detailed as you like by mixing and matching lines and curves. But when working fast, I like to quickly draw a stepped curve like this. Then you use the smooth control to round out the edges for a less jagged effect. You can see the playback curve's edges get rounder. And you can try out some of the wave presets for more complex pan shapes. For less regimented auto panning, you can change the rate to unsynced hertz and then set the rate amount by ear until you get the bouncing effect to fit the rhythm of the sound. And like I said, you can turn down the mix amount if you want your sound to stay more centered with just a touch of stereo fluttering on top. But in this case, I quite like mix at full with the ARP jumping from left to right. And for a bit more air up top, I'm also going to add a touch of multiband treble reverb before Pan Shaper. So listen as I sum the stereo output to mono. You can hear that the ARP stays solid. Now Now, I've used Pan Shaper for this example, but if you want to try drawable panning modulation for free, you can download our free pancake effect. I'll leave a link below. Now it's time for trick number 3. This stereo effect has a reputation as a phase destroyer, but it's not as harmful as you think if you know how to use it. Let me explain with this recording of my voice. I'm going to copy it across 2 channels, and I'm going to pan one hard left and one hard right. If I delay one side by more than about 40 milliseconds, you hear left and right as 2 different signals, like a short echo. But now I'll reduce the delay between the copies. At less than about 40 milliseconds, you perceive one wide sound, and it creates this ultra-wide stereo effect. This is the Haas effect, and it's usually used for stereo widening. However, listen when I sum the master to mono. Because the 2 waveforms are out of phase, the mono sum has this weird out of phase sound. This isn't ideal because it means that your mono mix and stereo mix will often sound very different in a bad way. So the Haas effect is a lot less popular than it used to be since producers got wise to this drawback. But does that mean it's useless? Well, let's find out. Here I'm going to use Pan Shaper again, this time on this vocal. This time I'll set the slider to Haas mode. Pan sets the direction, left or right. Range sets the distance in milliseconds between the left and right copies. This is the basic Haas effect, like we just looked at. It still sounds out of phase in mono. But there are a few tricks we can use to mitigate that. First, using a delay time of 15 milliseconds or under helps reduce the phasing sound in mono because there's less phase cancellation with shorter delays. While listening in mono, you can sometimes tune it to the sound and find a setting that's acceptable. However, something I still don't like about the Haas effect is the tilting to one side. It feels lopsided. But to get around that, let's use multiband. Here I've got a mid-range band that's tilted to the right, then this treble band is tilted to the left. And then reducing the width, then re-leveling with Width Shaper helps control the stereo even more. So now it sounds wide in stereo, but acceptable in mono too. Now, being honest, I probably wouldn't use the Haas effect on a lead vocal like this. That was more for demonstration. I'd usually use it more on incidental effects and ear candy and stuff that isn't so vital in the centre of the mix. And I should also mention that I've gone a bit crazy with the width in this project. In actual tracks, the most powerful way to use stereo effects is with restraint. I generally like to keep most of the mix centred, maybe with a bit of panning here and there, but then I'll use one of these tricks on one headline sound to make that sound purposefully jump out. Because if everything's wide, then nothing feels wide. That contrast of mostly centered sounds with one standout wide element will help your mix pop in mono and stereo. But what about other stereo effects I haven't covered, such as chorus, flanges and phasers? Well, go and watch this video next for a deep dive of all 3. And to try or buy Shaperbox on its own or in the full Cableguys bundle, head to cableguys.com.